Patrizia von Brandenstein is the production designer on Julia on HBO Max. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Patrizia, I wanted to start with what I have to imagine was one of the biggest challenges of the series, which is recreating Julia Child's iconic kitchen, which we see in her home and also on the set of The French Chef. So I just wanted to ask you, what kind of resources did you have? Did you get to visit the kitchen at the Smithsonian? And what was most challenging?
Well, the Smithsonian, who just went and she willed them their kitchen, and they went and got it. And piece by piece, they brought it all. I mean, the pierced wall hangers, every pot and pan, everything was in fact Julia's. However, I like to dig a little deeper, and I realized that this kitchen was some 40 years old. So I knew they had remodeled originally when they first moved in. And they had an architect friend whose name I could never discern, but they left their papers, including the plans for the kitchen. They left their papers at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. And they were very generous with us and gave us the plans, the original renovation of the house. They gave us some photographs, and there are detailed descriptions because she was very particular and she wanted color. She believed in strong color, just like she believed in strong flavor. So I was surprised to see that she had combined a lime green and pink and yellow and the basic blue-green, all in the same kitchen. And I thought, wow, this is a bold lady for 1961. So we made samples of it and made sure everything got together. And our director of the first episode, Charles McDougall, would say, oh, why is this lime green? And because, of course, it's shocking when you see it. However, on film, it has a wonderful blending quality, and I went with it. I did. And it complemented everything she wore because she loved color in her clothes too, and wore it vibrantly. And she loved color in her hair. She loved that too. So, but because she had an innate sense of what was right in color, it was marvelous. And I did follow it as carefully as I could. And I had the help of friends who described things to me that they had seen in her kitchen. And I found out some interesting things. Her favorite snack was cheese fish. That's what she liked. Every party she had them lay on the tables. That was the snack. She very seldom served more than 3 courses. And when she served it to friends, and she was cooking constantly, so she always had people for dinner. And they all said that Paul liked ice cream, but they got fruit. Paul got ice cream, they got fruit. She would have a main course, and it would be served in the kitchen on that big table, just like the one you see. And those very interesting chairs, which were made for her in Norway after a folkloric approach to a Norwegian kitchen, which she also had. And those things were constant throughout her life. It's not like she stopped giving dinner parties because she was 90. She didn't do that. She went right on, but always in the kitchen. Maybe on Thanksgiving, there would be a tablecloth in the dining room, but not usually.
Let me ask you about those other rooms in the house, because we do see a lot of Julia and Paul's house in the series. And from what I understand, it's a private residence now. So when you saw those plans in the library, did you see what the whole house looked like? Or how did you go about kind of imagining what that house would be?
If you follow her taste, which is well recorded, and the sense of space that they had and what they had in it. Because remember, even when our story opens, they were very widely traveled throughout the world. They had been to all the continents. They had been to Russia and China, and they had been to France and all the Scandinavian countries with Paul's work. So they had a lot of artifacts of very disparate culture. They had a strange drum from Ceylon, and they had a strange mask from China. But because of her, again, her sense of order and design and blending quality, there are many pictures, and of course I looked at them, but we also had access to papers that described things that's brought back from their travels, because they wrote each other all the time. If they were apart, which was seldom, they wrote extensively. But Paul wrote to his twin brother every day, even during the war, even during all his difficulties with the State Department. He wrote his brother every single day. And when he did, he described what he had bought, and where they were, and they had acquired it, and so forth. And Paul was a painter, so the house is decorated with his paintings and photographs.
Yeah, before we get into the set and WGBH, I want to ask you just about the extensive period work on this series. As you said, we're in the early 1960s, and we get to go into Jordan Marsh. We're in supermarkets. I mean, it's a beautiful recreation of the period. And of course, you've done period work before. So I wanted to ask you, how did you source, all of these kind of marvelous things that we see in, Jordan Marsh, for example, the televisions, the costumes? It's just really wonderful.
Well, I think the costumes are just fabulous from John Dunn, our designer. I'm a great believer in old newspapers. If you can find old newspapers, remember all those people who advertised in those days, it was every day. All the department stores ran daily specials and weekly specials. And then there was the opening season, and then the closing season sale. And then there was Christmas week, and then, et cetera. So if you go back and look for that, and of course, the monthly magazines, the ladies' magazines, you can find out a great deal about everyday life, and even being very specific in articles about Julia, articles about food, articles about women's places in the home, etc. And she changed a great deal. And one of the things she changed was that kind of information being fed to American women. So I think we took good care to observe her life and her world. And I'm very pleased that we were able to do it and had the wherewithal to do it and the support to do it, because you don't do it alone.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, I mentioned earlier, you've recreated Julia's kitchen for the WGBH set, and there's also the set where she shot the pilot of The French Chef. What I wanted to ask you about those sets is, it is functioning as a television set. We're seeing the making of this television show. And of course, you're also making a television show at the same time. So talk about kind of making those sets functional, where you have cameras, but you also have, modern cameras that are capturing what the old cameras are capturing. Talk about, thinking about functionality and designing these sets.
Well, their wonderful motion picture museum in Rhode Island was very generous to us. And we had someone on our crew, Robert Schlenig, who had actually worked as a very, very young employee of the old WGBH. So he had seen Julia, he had seen the shows, and he had moved those cameras around, and he knew other people who did. We were able to contact those people. We rented the cameras. We asked them to come, and we asked if we could modify them so that they would be compatible with our films and so forth. And we wound up installing lipstick cameras inside the big old ones. but they would still work beautifully. They glided across the floor, glided across the floor wonderfully well. So that's how we did it. That's interesting about that first set that she did the pilot on. The producer, Russ Marash, had a friend who had a test kitchen in a gas company and so forth. So once we found the location, we went the same route and we borrowed a kitchen, a test kitchen, which was in pieces because they don't do that anymore either. And we put it back together and gave it a good varnish and minimal decor because it was thrown together really in a day or so for Julia. And we followed that, the same thing. And we were in an old armory in the drill hall of an armory. And we miraculously were able to run gas and run water and do all the things for a kitchen. And we had a lot of fun doing it too, because it was nice to have this very benign Julia presence in a drill hall, which was very full of guys in boots tramping around. It was fun.
I have to imagine one of the major parts of your work on this series is the food prep, the set decoration involved in food. So just wanted to ask you, because we see not just the finished product, but so many different iterations of these recipes as Julia's testing them and trying them. Just talk about the complexity of getting all of that on camera and all of the kind of set decoration involved in doing essentially a culinary show.
The food in the show is as much a character as our actors are. We knew it had to be absolutely safe and absolutely delicious, and that actors would want to eat it. And it had to look like what Julia achieved, which she had a great sense of presentation. So we investigated photos of her recipes that were done for books or done for interviews. And we got as close to the china and the silver and so forth as we could. But the food itself was created by our excellent stylist, Christine Tobin. And she followed the recipes, but she took extra care to make sure that the vegetables and the parsley and the herbs, et cetera, were exactly right and fresh, because food that has to sit around for a 12-hour day is not going to look great about 6 o'clock at night, and besides that, it won't be fit to eat. So, but she paid great care about that. And I'm grateful that she did, because the sauces glisten, the vegetables almost crunch, when you look at them, and they're perfect. So but we did invest as much care and a great deal of expense giving our stylist the exactly right kitchen to prepare the food. She gave us her dimensions and the space she needed. She was about maybe 30 feet from the set. So it arrived steaming and hot or chilled and icy, and it was exactly right. But it's because we were able to locate as closely as we did.
Yeah, the care really translates on the screen. I mean, it's absolutely, the food looks delectable as you're watching the episode, so it's quite a treat to watch. Some of my favorite episodes of the series are.
The crew liked it too.
I bet, absolutely. Some of my favorite episodes from the series are when Julia gets to travel, leave Cambridge, and go to various locations. So I wanted to ask you about a few of them, starting with the episode where she goes to San Francisco to sell the show to another market. So I wanted to ask you about scouting those locations. Where did you shoot those scenes? Were you in San Francisco? And if not, there's that scene on the pier with the fog. I mean, it really does evoke, if you weren't there, it really does evoke San Francisco and the hills.
Boston has fog too. And we were slightly north of Boston at a very pretty town. And there was a pier, and it reminded me very much of San Francisco in the 60s. I lived there then and traveled around a good bit. And it did remind me very much because the pier was wooden and there were wooden benches and it had the right feel. The fog was a bonus and I'm very glad we had it. It was beautiful and very romantic and sad. The scene where Paul encounters the daughter of his early love who died. It's very moving, very moving. And, but I'm glad you liked San Francisco because we had a lot of fun doing it. Although our graphics designer was very overstressed because there was a lot to do.
I bet. I imagine the same is the case for the episode set in New York, which is one of my absolute favorites of the season. You're at the Waldorf Astoria, or what was standing in for the Waldorf at the Pierre Hotel. So talk about recreating these iconic New York locations for the series.
With care, and of course, being a series, it's not like you can dash off to another location, another city, even as close as Boston and New York. But we were helped by, in certain ways, there's a certain sections of Boston that does give you San Francisco or gives you New York streets. The way the pavement is laid, we tried to digitally or physically replace signage that we would see. There are patches of green and it's East Coast, so the foliage is essentially the same. And we had a wonderful time doing it, needless to say. And even old New Yorkers like me, so. Because of course people do catch, if you looked very closely, you would know it wasn't New York. But who of us can really say what New York was like 60, 70 years ago? But I remember it very well because I was there. So, and we had others on our crew. I wasn't the only one, but we remembered things about New York.
Yeah, it's beautifully done. Before I let you go, Patrizia, I want to ask you, I spoke to the composer of Julia a few days ago, Jeff Dana, who gave a kind of teaser that season 2 is going to open and shoot in France. So
Ooh.
if you can divulge any, I did. I don't know if I should have, but I did. Is there anything you can tease us about, the work that you're doing to prepare for season 2, especially if it's true that the series will shoot and open in France for season 2?
Well, of course, they like to keep things very quiet, but we know we have to vary our scenery and we have to vary the cities because Julia traveled a great deal. And she had a beloved place in France that she adored, and perhaps we'll see it.
Well, I hope so. Very much hope we'll see it. Patrizia von Brandenstein, congratulations on this first season of Julia, and thanks so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you, David.